I call the honourable member David Clendon.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Kia ora koutou. Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to take this first opportunity to speak to this bill and to the budget generally. What we've heard today, of course, is the opening salvos and what will be a long debate. And we welcome that debate and the opportunity to put up some of our ideas, our beliefs, our alternative approaches to this very critical issue of where does the money come from and where do we spend it, and in whose interests do we undertake those transactions. There's a lot that can be said and no doubt will be said about this bill and about the budget more generally, but there's a great deal more that can be said about what has been left out of these documents. You could talk about doing a gap analysis of this series of propositions we've heard from the government today. But really you could more properly talk about a chasm. There's this great white space where there could be something resembling a vision. There's a complete absence where you might hope to see something that would suggest there is a long-term strategy, a long-term plan to establish and create a long-term socially and environmentally sustainable economy in this country that has an absolute and a clear capacity to achieve that goal and to that state. Instead, we are offered nothing more innovative or visionary than some quite mean-spirited cuts to public spending, cuts to income support, cuts to the government's contribution to individuals' and families' long-term savings. These cuts that will hurt families, will hurt households, because they come at a time when incomes are at best flat and in many cases are reducing, when people are struggling to pay their daily day-to-day expenses and costs to meet their bills, and we see nothing in here that's going to give those people much hope, much confidence that they are actually in good hands, that their future is being well regarded and that they have got some hope of a better future. We see the cuts to the government's contributions to KiwiSaver. In itself, it is a breach of an assurance that this government gave to the general public, gave to participants and contributors, that KiwiSaver is something that would not be meddled with. This has been a remarkably successful mechanism. KiwiSaver has been a success. It's almost been a victim of its own success, to the extent that the take-up has been such that it has caused some difficulties. An investment scheme of this sort is one of the last things that governments should play politics with. Like superannuation fund, long-term savings schemes are things that people need to have confidence in. They need to know that there is some security there, that the rules will not change arbitrarily, year by year, budget by budget, political term by political term. It is not helpful for the investors who in time will utilise the sums of money that are available to them through these funding programs, through the savings programs. It diminishes the confidence of the saver and of the investor, and that is not helpful. The government insists it will seek a mandate for its changes at the next election, which I must say is perhaps one of the few innovative aspects of this budget, to suggest that somehow retrospectively you can get a mandate for taking away from people something which you assured them you would not take away. Something like 110,000 parents will be affected by the cuts to working for families unveiled in the budget. More than 23,000, about a quarter of them, will be earning less than $60,000 in their combined household incomes. Families with a combined income of some $60,000 are not well-to-do people, particularly if they are still supporting mortgages that they might have taken on perhaps in happier times, or indeed if they are paying rentals which are increasing on homes which are increasingly poorly maintained and often substandard. We see a lowering of the abatement threshold to $35,000. And what this means in practical terms, a two-parent family, one partner working full-time at the very meagre minimum wage which this government allows them, even given the generous 25 cents per hour increase. One partner are full-time on the minimum wage, the other working 12 hours of the week at the minimum wage, that abatement will apply to them. Raising the abatement rate to 25 cents in the dollar effectively results in a marginal rate, an effective marginal tax rate of some 58%, which is simply untenable. Where is the incentive for people to improve their position, to try harder? We're constantly hearing from the government side, people need to simply work harder to better their position. Where is the incentive to do that when you take away the level of support that people have not only come to expect, but actually are still reliant on to a large extent? Much of what we've seen in this budget, and indeed in this tax bill that we're debating here tonight, is an assumption which can at best be termed an optimistic hope that the economy will actually come right. The growth forecasts here are extremely optimistic, and already the financial commentators are shining a light on those what have been termed heroic assumptions about growth in the economy in the next few years. They are relying on Treasury estimates, but there's an unfortunate history to that. Of course, the Treasury in the last several years, particularly since 2008, have routinely overestimated growth by some 2 to 3 percentage points of GDP. Why would we depend on forecasts that have historically proved to be at best optimistic and often just plain wrong? Perhaps it's a reflection of the Prime Minister's former profession as a trader, a currency trader, a speculator perhaps. Essentially that is an activity, a sector that requires people to be very good at gambling. And this essentially we are seeing as a gamble, gambling on growth. And it's not even gambling on solid, productive, sustainable growth. There seems to be an inbuilt assumption that this meddling, this fiddling around the margins of taxes and spending and cuts in government will somehow return us sooner rather than later to economic growth, increased confidence, more consumption, particularly of imported goods, more borrowing, more debt related to property. In short, we're back onto the good old treadmill, the treadmill of increased debt, debt-fuelled inflation, which inevitably will lead to the next bubble. We've heard much from the government tonight about nobody putting up much in the way of an alternative. On some suggestions, very happy to do it. Go to our website, you'll get a more comprehensive set. We have a small paper here, the Green Budget Paper 2011. We're putting out there for people to see. This is what the Green Party thinks the future should look like. This is what we think are the solutions, some practical propositions to get us out of the unfortunate situation that no doubt we are in. You're most welcome to read it, and I hope you do. One of the reasons we are told... excuse me, Mr. Speaker. One hopes that the members of the government will undertake to read this document. We are told that one of the reasons for this, one of the needs for this cuts to spending is to fund the repairs of Christchurch, the very necessary investment in rebuilding that very fine city. We have an alternative proposition, and of course it is a levy, a fixed-term, probably 5-year, very modest levy that would provide over 5 years some $5 billion, which would remove the necessity of borrowing. The government's proposition of borrowing that $5 billion will lead us to an interest bill per annum of some $250 million a year. I struggled to comprehend this afternoon when we heard the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister speak of the problem of rebuilding Christchurch as having been somehow solved because they were going to borrow money to fund it. In what world is that a solution, a long-term sustainable solution to a natural disaster, to go out and borrow to the hilt to pay it, when we have a viable option right here? A levy, 1.5%. levy on incomes from 48 to 70,000, 3% for those on incomes above 70,000. Reversing the 2% cut to corporate tax would raise that $1 billion a year. For the taxpayer earning around $50,000 a year, that would amount to the princely sum of some 50 cents per week. Not dollars, 50 cents per week. It would not be visible to the average person on $50,000 a year. Those on 70 and above would pay around $6 a week. Again, not an extravagant figure. people earning above 100k would pay about $23 a week, and most of those could well afford it. That would enable us to rebuild that city without resort to these unfortunate propositions. Kia ora. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call the honourable member Heather Roy.
Thank you very much,
And
Mr. Speaker.
just before I do...